Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. The games continue to come thick and fast with Norwich City taking on Middlesbrough this weekend. It's a Sunday kick-off, a bit of a strange time, to be honest, but it's one that, of course, we're going to cover on Tactics Board today. First of all, we're going to take a look at the 11 that I think Johannes Torup will choose, and I think it could be an interesting one. Then we're going to have a bit of a closer look at Middlesbrough and how the game might pan out. And then I'm going to come on to long balls and how Norwich maybe can deal with some of the problems that they've faced in the last couple of games. But we're going to start with that 11. So without further ado, here's the team I think Johannes Torup will pick for Sunday's game. So I've gone for George Long in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba at centre back, with Ben Krezene on the left side of defence, Kenny McLean, Oscar Schwartau and Anis Ben Slimane in midfield, Cade Gordon on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Josh Sargent through the middle up front. You'll notice there are a couple of changes in there, and that's because I think Johannes Torup might go for a bit of rotation this weekend. He's spoken previously about the fact that he feels the third game in a 3-game week can often be where the players are feeling that exhaustion a little bit. And although he has made some changes quite early on in games and he's rotated those substitutions, I think he'll take it one step further this weekend and give some players who maybe look like they need a little bit of a rest some time on the bench. It feels like he's also got the opportunity to do that given the last two performances, which haven't been the end of the world if you look at the whole piece, but also they don't provide maybe the same momentum that Norwich had going into the international break. So I think there's the opportunity there for Torup, and I think he will take it. One of the positions that I think he may do that in is left back, and although we've all seen how important Callum Doyle can be for Norwich this season and how much of an asset his passing is, I think he looks like maybe he could do with the rest. He hasn't really looked that much like a left back, especially away from home. And there is a school of thought that maybe back at Carrow Road, where Norwich are more likely to dominate the game and to have more possession, that might suit him. But I think with the way that Ben Krezene has been performing in recent weeks, that is an option for Torup. Of course, you could see Doyle coming over and maybe Cordoba or Duffy being rested. But right now, it feels to me like it might be a smart move just to have Krezene in there for that one, even if you then slot Callum Doyle back in fairly quickly. I'm not 100% that Torup will do it, but I think he needs to make changes somewhere, and that feels like a position where he could do it. In midfield, I'd expect that we probably will see a change as well. Of course, Emiliano Marcondes trusted with his first start for the club at Preston, but maybe didn't look the same sprightly influence that he did at Stoke and in the whole game in that brief cameo as well. He looked maybe a little bit tired towards the end of that appearance, and you can completely understand that when you consider the fact that he actually went months without playing any competitive football before he joined Norwich. It felt like maybe it was a little bit of a step too far for him at Preston, even though there were some good signs. And you'd think, given the fact that Oscar Schwartau didn't actually come off the bench in that game, that he should have fresh legs to come in for that one. It feels like he is probably at the top of the pecking order when Marcelino Nunez is injured. And of course, with him unlikely to be back for this game, you'd say that Schwartau may well be coming in. So I've got Schwartau in there. And then at right wing, I've made a similar gamble to that left back position because, as I said, I think Torup does need to make those changes, and that right wing position feels like one where maybe they've got someone who isn't an absolute staple in the team. Now, I think we've seen progress from Ante Cianats in a Norwich shirt, but he's still yet to nail down the position to the level that maybe Cordoba has, or Borja Sainz this season, or Josh Sargent or Kenny McLean. He's not really one of those vital presences in the team. And I think that gives an opportunity for Torup to get someone in there like Gordon, who actually has a bit of momentum behind him. He scored his first Norwich goal a few weeks ago. He scored during the international break for England's under-20 squad. And it feels like he's in a pretty good moment after another good substitute performance against Preston at wing-back, albeit. So back in his favoured position, you feel that he could put in a pretty decent performance. And I think if you look around that squad at some of the positions that Torup could make changes to, right wing for me would be right up there at the top of the list. And there was one more aspect of the starting 11 that I wanted to discuss, and that is in goal, because I can see a few people now suggesting that maybe George Long should be dropped in favour of Archie Mayer, and you can understand it given the fact that there have already been a couple of errors from the goalkeeper. But I think possession-wise, he's actually been okay. He's not made any errors in that sense. It feels like tactically he slots quite well into Norwich's system. And given the fact that we haven't seen much of Mayer, to be honest, of course, he's someone who behind the scenes they've seen a lot more of. I think if they could get him into the team, then they would, because he's younger. He maybe looks like he could provide them with a little bit more value in the future. But they are the ones seeing him behind the scenes at the training ground, and there must be a reason why he's currently behind Long in the pecking order. So I wouldn't expect Torup to change Long from that position. I think the blow that would be to his confidence as well would be really damaging. So although I can understand the frustration around some of the mistakes, I don't think right now that's really something that the coaching team will be considering. Moving on to Middlesbrough briefly, and it looks like this will actually be quite a tough test for Norwich. Boro maybe haven't had the best start to the season results-wise, and I think people expected them maybe to do a little bit better, because last season they looked pretty good, and with some of the teams who left the division, I think a lot of people predicted that they would be the ones to fill that void and to go on and compete maybe even for automatic promotion. They haven't quite done that just yet, but their performances have been very good. Their data has been very good. And of course, they put it all together with a 1-0 win over Sheffield United in midweek. So they'll head to Carrow Road feeling confident, feeling a bit of momentum, and probably hoping that that result was a bit of a turning point for their season, which of course isn't great news for Norwich. But the good news for the home side is that tactically it feels like the sort of matchup that they've thrived on this season. Middlesbrough, first of all, won't play as many long balls in behind, which was something I think we saw Norwich struggle with against Preston and Stoke, with that high line and the fact that they're still getting used to Torup's press. It is a little bit of a problem, and of course we will go into that in a little bit more detail, but that won't be tested as much against Middlesbrough. Also, in an offensive sense, they'll have more space to play with behind the back line, because Middlesbrough want to press high up the pitch. That means a high defensive line, and therefore more space for the likes of Boro and Josh Sargent to exploit. And we've seen at various times this season how effectively Norwich can do that when they get the chance. So although Michael Carrick's side do have some very good players, they are trending in the right direction. Norwich will hope they've caught them just before they reach their full potential, and that they can exploit some of the tactical elements that maybe go in their favour. But both sides like possession, both sides want to play with short passes and through balls, so it might be quite an interesting tactical battle to see them compete for basically the same thing. Of course, Torup will be very focused on making sure his team does that, but tactically it will be a very interesting one, and one that I think suits Norwich a little bit more than their last couple of games. Now we're going to finish with a section on those long balls in behind and why Norwich have been struggling with those. As I mentioned, it was a bit of a weak spot for them against Preston and against Stoke, and I actually asked Johannes Torup about that in his pre-Preston press conference. So to start off with, I'll let him explain what he thinks the issue is and where maybe the dilemma is for his players at the moment. Sort of long balls and how you deal with that. Obviously, you want to press quite high, and that means quite a high defensive line.
Yeah.
I think there were a couple of times that Stoke actually got a bit of joy from just clipping the ball over your defence. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think we were caught a little bit in between in too many moments, especially the second half in Stoke, where if the pressure is not well enough from the front line and we're not close enough, then we open up for this more direct play where it's more easy for them to pass it in behind, and we have to defend with our front to our own goal, which is not ideal. So it's a matter of a compact structure in everything we do. So we have to follow the first line of press, and if we're not close enough, then we have to drop off a little bit and make sure that we cannot invite for too many passes in behind of our back line. But it's a tricky game against a team where they actually want to attract a little bit, and then when we step up, they bring it in behind. So it requires some good game reading, some anticipation of the game, and then working as a unit, and then also accepting in some areas of the game that the compact structure is more important than the high pressing always.
Is that part of the reason why it's important for you to have game intelligent players in your squad?
It is, because what we have to create when we train is that we we take out all the moments that happens in football, and then we try to replicate them out there. So hopefully, when we have trained a lot out there, they can just recognize, okay, when they play in games, it's exactly the same that's happening here. And that's the way that we see it. So they can also react fast. They can actually do some movements before the pass is made, so we can be as close as possible. But it takes a lot of training and it takes a lot of experience. But again, I can invite you in and you can see some pictures from where we started and where we are now, and we are getting there, and we have some players that are really, really doing well. But it can be difficult against teams that are vertical in their style, to know exactly when to step up and put them under pressure, and when to hold a little bit.
Well, there you have it. The problem for Norwich is when they get caught between pressing high and dropping off. And of course, Torp is someone who will want to see his team pressing high as much as possible. He wants proactive defending. He wants as much of the ball as possible. But maybe it's not realistic to expect that every single time at this stage of the transition. And that's sort of what he was talking about. Those players deciding when to go and when to be a little bit more conservative in their approach, and they maybe haven't got that balance right every single time. They've got caught in two minds, and that's where we saw some joy for Stoke and Preston in those last two games. The prime example of that was probably the penalty award early on at Deepdale, when Robbie Brady's ball in behind allowed Emil Rees to exploit a huge amount of space in behind that Norwich defence. Here's a graphic on how that worked, and I think you can see where the problem was a little bit. I think you can see there what the problem is. You've got Robbie Brady in the Norwich half with a good amount of space and time. Neither Fisher nor Slimane is close enough to deny him that. And we all know the amount of quality that he has passing-wise. So really, in that situation, the defensive line needs to work out. You've got a good player there. You've got plenty of space behind you. It's probably time to drop off a little bit and deny Emil Rees the amount of space that he had eventually in behind. But they don't do that quick enough. Brady plays the ball at the right time. Rees times his run perfectly. And there was only one conclusion from there, really. And it's a situation, actually, they found a few times with Tom Cannon in the Potteries as well. And I'm sure it's something they've gone over with their analysts plenty of times since then. So it's definitely something they'll be aware of. But of course, it takes time to gel as a team. And with the number of new players there, it's almost that knowing when your teammates are going to go and having that intuition a little bit that it feels like they're still working on. Now, they won't have to deal with that in such big spaces against Middlesbrough, but Boro do like through balls still. So on a micro level, it's something they'll need to work out. I'm sure the ideal situation for Torp is getting that pressing right rather than the defenders having to drop off. But of course, it's all about balance. And as I said, particularly at this stage of the tactical transition, it's something that probably there does need to be a little bit of compromise on. So I'm sure it's something Norwich will be looking out for against Middlesbrough. Of course, plenty of interesting aspects going into that game, and we'll have them all covered across our channels. So go to pinkun.com/subscribe if you haven't already, and you'll have access to all of that fine content. Thank you very much for joining me on Tactics Board. I'll see you again very, very soon.